Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you a bit about something that is really dear to my heart and something that I've just sort of been thinking about a lot recently, and it was sort of brought into my awareness again because it's something I think about a lot, but it was brought back to my awareness after making my video about Bjork, and it's this notion of creativity and how that interacts with sensitivity. What is the connection between the two? In the video where I talked about Bjork, I mentioned how as a kid she was sort of bullied. It seems to me as if she had a very sensitive disposition as well as being very creative, and so that sort of sparked the inspiration for this video today. So my name is Deanna Faye. I'm a singer-songwriter, and I have identified as a highly sensitive person for quite a while now, but it's something that I haven't really thought about until recently again. I've felt like I was weird and different and extremely sensitive for as far back as I can recall, since I was a little kid. This is something that I really struggled with because I was always told, well, you're too sensitive, toughen up, But I think it's only been in the last 2 years, I would say, where I've finally sort of just accepted that my sensitivity is one of my traits, and it's something that I've embraced as part of me. And I see it as a strength. Now it definitely has its downsides to it. I've sort of learned to take that self-awareness and instead of numbing it, embracing it and sort of working through the challenges of being sensitive. But that's not what the topic of today is mainly about. I want to talk a bit more about creativity and why your sensitivity is actually your creativity and how there might be a link between the two. Now, I'm not saying that all creative types are highly sensitive or very sensitive. I just think that having some sensitivity is part of being creative. If creativity is something that you're looking to Microsoft. So if you are also a sensitive baby like me, and perhaps also a creative person, you might have wondered what makes you a creative person versus someone who is not so creative. I kind of feel like the dichotomy between the two is not as intense as we sometimes think. I think that creative people, they're seen as creative maybe because those are the types of people that are more likely to express themselves with creative stuff like making music, etc. But I think that lots of people are creative in the world who might not realize they're actually being creative, and I think oftentimes these are also the sensitive types of people. And I'm talking about you out there who you might enjoy, maybe you really appreciate art, maybe you appreciate sort of like the finer details of life. And I don't mean that in a pretentious way. I mean, like, you might be the type to like stop and look at flowers and look at gardens, and you might notice little things, details around you in the world, like sensory things that perhaps others don't as often. And you might be the type to sort of point them out, like, oh, look at the moon tonight, check out how beautiful this rose is. Oh, look, there's a little dandelion growing between the cracks. These tiny little details that others maybe see, but they just sort of glaze over. You're more likely to want to stop and just, you notice the little details. And sometimes you might even feel overwhelmed because you're very stimulated by the world around you. And as a sensitive person, the way you experience the world, it might be very different from someone who's not sensitive, Not to say that people who aren't sensitive don't experience, the beauties of life. When you're a sensitive person, especially if you're highly sensitive, these stimuli, they can be quite intense and almost, it can be overstimulating at times but it can also be very overwhelming in a good way. You know, it could bring a lot of joy, and you might have these moments of almost like intense inspiration, and that is part of being creative. You know, the part of you that notices all the fine details and, you know, like the textures around you and the sounds and the smells, and, you know, really can appreciate them. That's also the part of us that helps us to be creative. And so I think that many of us who identify as creative might also identify as being sensitive. Or even if we don't, then others might notice that we're more sensitive to things. I think that creativity comes in all sorts of forms. It doesn't have to be restricted to, you know, the big A fine arts type of stuff. You could be creative in your cooking. You could be creative in the way you dress yourself or style yourself. Maybe the way you organize your home is creative. And even just the way you see and experience the world could be in a creative manner. But with sensitivity, I think that when we grow up very sensitive and we do experience that sort of sometimes overstimulation, I think that creativity sometimes becomes the way that we soothe and calm ourselves. So thinking back to when I was just a young child, I was really into coloring and drawing and music, like dancing, these kinds of sort of expressive things. And when I look back on it, I see now that the reason I was really, really into creative activities is probably because I was using them to soothe myself and to calm myself in stressful situations, or in, you know, a stressful family life, for example. So I think that sensitivity is kind of like a precursor to creativity in a way. So let's say you're someone who's essentially born more sensitive than others. You may be more likely to be a creative person. And again, it doesn't mean you become an artist, but you're probably more likely to enjoy creative types of activities, or just appreciating others who do create. So Gabor Mate, who mostly talks about addictions, has also talked a bit about how the things that we experience in our childhood and when we're young affect our health and the way we experience and interact with the world as adults. He had talked about this one musician, and I can't recall if he mentioned her name or not, but this musician was expressing herself through music and through songwriting, and she was expressing herself very beautifully through the music. But something I thought was really interesting that Gabor Mate points out is that the reason she was able to express herself so beautifully through music is because she didn't have anywhere else to express herself. And I just want to pause and sort of like let that soak in. Like, she didn't have anywhere else to express herself, so she needed creativity, the music. She needed the music, the art form, to express herself, express her emotions, express her thoughts, her feelings, and her body. And that really stood out to me as a songwriter as well, because something that I've noticed in my experience with my therapist, so I see a therapist pretty regularly, is that I have a really difficult time expressing emotion. So I don't have trouble expressing myself like overall. Like, I can talk, I can joke, I can laugh. I think I have like a relatively expressive disposition, but I have a lot of trouble expressing actual emotions and needs and feelings in my body. I often feel like a disconnect between the way I feel in my body and my emotions and, you know, how I present myself. And it's really interesting that Gabor Mate points out how this difficulty in expressing ourselves could actually lead to creativity, because we use that art form, we use that creativity to express ourselves. And so in a way, this creativity is almost like a coping mechanism, or not in a bad way, but it's something that is useful for sensitive people to cope with intense emotions or experiences or feelings. And as I learn to express myself better and express my emotions better, does that mean that I won't be able to express myself through art and music? No, of course not. Hopefully I'd be even better and improved at expressing myself through my art form as I grow and improve the way I do express emotions and, connect to them. But it's just a really interesting thing to think about how, as a kid, I think that I really connected to music specifically because it allowed me to feel my feelings. It allowed me to express my feelings to others, even when I would sing or write songs. And I just find that really fascinating. And something that I see as sort of like a myth that is going around, and even I thought this as well, is that often creative types think that our trauma and what we've experienced as a child in terms of like some negative childhood adverse experiences, we think that our trauma is the origin of our creativity. But what I found fascinating is that Gabor Mate points out that no, it is not our trauma. It was actually our sensitivity that enabled us to be creative. And so sensitivity is essentially why we're creative. The way that we process the world and experience the world through this sensitive lens is very different from someone who is not sensitive, and therefore, although they may have experienced trauma, if they were not sensitive, they might not have developed creativity, and they might not have used creativity and art to cope with the trauma necessarily. But it doesn't mean you have to have had trauma or even adverse childhood experiences to become creative. You could have just been a very sensitive person, and you might see things and feel things from the world around you that others might not notice. And you might write a poem, or you might, paint a picture, even write a story as a kid, especially, based off of those experiences. And if you continue to cultivate that creativity and embrace your sensitivity, it can be an incredible and powerful tool for creating more and for creating things that resonate with others. And I think something that is really interesting about creative and sensitive types, when you've got that combination, essentially sensitivity is like a function, and because you're sensitive, it leads you to being more creative. And so these creative types, these sensitive types, they experience all those textures of life and, the sensory world a bit more vividly. It's almost like, a lot of people take psychedelic drugs or things like weed, marijuana, to enhance their senses and experience all like the textures of life. So, feeling wind on your skin and seeing like the flares of sunlight around you, and maybe you notice like little details that you wouldn't have otherwise when you do get stoned, just a little puff on the magic dragon. But the point I'm trying to make is an artist and a creative or a sensitive type experiences these textures of life differently and more vividly. Never mind the weed or the drugs, they just do. And it's something that they might have had their whole life. And they use that to express to others. So when I write music, when I write songs, it's often based on a sort of sensory experience that I'm trying to express. And sometimes it could have just been like a very fleeting moment that I'm trying to express, but to me, it was very intense being a sensitive person. And when I express that through my music and through my lyrics, I'm trying to express that experience of being sensitive. And so the audience, when they listen to that music, they get to have that experience through me, through my song. The audience gets to experience an experience that I've had through the song or through the art form, or they get to experience something that they never have before purely through art. And I think that's why so many people do enjoy art, and you don't have to be sensitive to appreciate art, but I think it is a part of it. But sometimes we listen to music or we look at art or watch a movie and we're so blown away by it, not because it's something that we haven't experienced, but on the contrary, because the artist has expressed something so well and so vividly and clearly that we've experienced as well. And so we feel this sense of gratitude to the artist for expressing something that we couldn't or perhaps didn't know how to express. And so the sensitivity, where the sensitivity comes in, is the sensitivity is what allowed the artist or the creative person to sense the world, to experience the world in such a way that it is so vivid and clear, almost like that they're able to express it better. If you're a sensitive person and you're also a creative type, I want you to look at your sensitivity and I want you to appreciate it and really, really look to see where your creativity lies and see if it is in your sensitivity. And if you can relate to that, well, you can start to appreciate your sensitivity just a little bit better and understand that the act of appreciating art, but also creating it, requires this sensitivity and this sort of openness and open-mindedness to experience life, to experience the world around you, and perhaps a way that is just a little bit different from others. And while it might feel like a negative to be that sensitive at times, especially if those around you don't understand or can't relate, it's truly a strength. And I think if you would like to work on appreciating your sensitivity and also improving your creativity at the same time, you can do something called artist dates. And I got this idea from Julia Cameron, the author of The Artist's Way. And she talks about something called the artist date. And this is essentially taking yourself out alone. Don't bring others with you. It's almost like you're going on a date with yourself and really listening to what your inner child wants to do and following that sort of will or that urge. And my example of what I do for my artist dates, and I didn't realize that this is something I was already doing. I found the term and then I realized, oh, this is something I already do. But what I do for my artist dates is I like to pop on my headphones, I go for a little walk, or like a long walk actually, and I wander around. Sometimes I wander in somewhere I've never been before. I like to just go down any street and, take a bunch of turns. Maybe get a little bit lost, it's okay. Just make sure you've got your phone on you, because one time I did that and my phone died and I really was lost, but I figured it out because, I kept walking and then eventually I recognized something. But I listen to music and I just sort of listen to whatever music strikes me in that moment, what matches the mood. I hum along, I sing along. Sometimes I'll sit in a swing, like in a park. I know I definitely look a bit nutty doing it, but I'll sing along to the music I'm listening to. It does seem a little bit childish, right? But basically I'm providing space for myself to express and connect to that part of me that wants to experience the world, but I'm doing it in a sort of controlled way, in the sense that when you're sensitive, sometimes there's too much stimulation and it's not really inspiring your creativity because you're just overly stimulated. But when you do these artist dates or these sort of little self dates, you're allowing yourself to take in the world, and this is something that is called filling the well. And basically, when you do things like watching movies, experiencing art, experiencing your senses in a present way, looking at flowers, taking long walks and sort of wandering around, listening to music, these are essentially filling the well of your creativity, and you're nurturing your sensitivity. You're not numbing it out. You're really experiencing the world. And it's something that I find really integral to being creative, is that in order to express yourself, you need to have a self to express to begin with. And so that's why sometimes when you're trying to create or trying to work on your next project, your next art project, whatever it is, you sometimes get that block. And it's not because you aren't creative and you don't have anything to say, but maybe you just haven't been filling your well enough, and perhaps you haven't been nurturing your sensitivity enough. And just go out there and do different things, experience the world, and enjoy the process. And by doing these activities where we're fully present in sensing our world and living our life, it is so integral to our creativity. And the final thing I kind of wanted to just mention is that it's okay that you're sensitive. I know that if you are very sensitive and you're sort of just new to the idea of being extra sensitive, it can feel very overwhelming, and it can feel like, that maybe you're weaker than others, or you're not good enough because you're not as tough, so to speak. But your sensitivity is quite beautiful. It can be quite a great strength, and it is kind of like your superpower in that you can sense things better and more clearly than others. And so when we're able to notice that we're sensitive and we're aware of it, we can also nurture it and take care of it, and also just take care of ourselves better. If you're sensitive, you know that you might need more downtime. You might need more time where you don't expose yourself to tons of stimuli. If you have a full-time job that is quite stimulating, then when you're not at work, you probably need a lot more rest, perhaps more than someone who is more extroverted or less sensitive, so to speak. And so I don't want you to feel down on yourself for being sensitive. To my fellow sensitive babes, you're truly a superhero, because you have this trait which makes you a bit more vulnerable and sensitive, but it also gives you a strength that others might not, and that is the ability to experience the world in a different way. And then you have the option and ability to express yourself. Normally, I make videos about music and songwriting and creativity, and if this video is something you've enjoyed, please like, share, and especially hit the subscribe button below. Leave a comment if you are experiencing sensitivity and if that's interacted with your creativity, and let me know what you do to take yourself out on your little artist date if you try it out, and let me know how it works out for you. I'll see you next time. Take care.